There are moments in life when you realize something is unsettling. It's not a lack of dreams. It's not a lack of potential. It's not a lack of ambition. You know exactly what you want. You know where you could get to. Sometimes you can even see the grand version of yourself staring back at you, like an unsettling reflection in a mirror. The problem isn't the vision. The problem is that when the time comes to act, some invisible force paralyzes you. It's not physical exhaustion. It's not a lack of time. It's something else, deeper, quieter, and much more dangerous. It's a kind of internal sabotage that uses your own mind against you. And the strangest thing is that it works with an efficiency you don't find even in your most ambitious plans. This is where Machiavelli enters as an unexpected figure, not to teach you to be evil, but to reveal a human mechanism that most ignore. Every human being carries within themselves a power struggle, a struggle that happens silently in small choices, in moments when you know what you should do, but don't. Machiavelli asserted that where there is power, there is conflict. And this conflict in your life doesn't happen outside. It happens inside you, in the mental space where your ambition tries to command and your laziness tries to overthrow it. The most frightening thing is that often you don't even realize you're being governed by this opposing force. You think you decided, I'll do it later, but you didn't decide. You were governed. You were influenced. You were defeated. Imagine for a moment that your life is a small principality, a territory full of potential resources and opportunities. You are the rightful prince of this territory, but there is a lurking, stealthy minister whom Machiavelli would describe as dangerous precisely because he acts in the shadows. This minister is laziness. He speaks softly, but he speaks constantly. He argues with distorted yet convincing logic. You're tired. You don't need it today. Tomorrow will be easier. You deserve to rest before you start. He doesn't confront you directly. He convinces you to surrender. He governs through emotional manipulation. He governs through comfort. He governs through the addiction to inertia. And every time you give in, the principality weakens. Every time you procrastinate, you lose a battle in this territory that should be yours. But there's something even more unsettling. You believe that laziness is merely a flaw, as if it were a moral failing, as if it were something shameful that happens because you aren't disciplined enough. That's a lie. Laziness isn't a flaw. It's a power, and like all power, it fights to maintain control. Machiavelli would say that nothing within a territory wants to lose its influence without resistance. And laziness is exactly that, an internal power that doesn't want to be dethroned. You can try to ignore it, but it doesn't disappear. You can try to motivate yourself, but motivation is unstable. You can try willpower, but it fails when you need it most. The only way to overcome an internal power is to replace it with a greater power, and that power is strategically organized ambition, not dreamy ambition. Before any change can happen, you need to acknowledge this silent war. You need to admit that there is a political conflict happening within your own mind. Machiavelli stated that the prince who does not understand the internal forces of his kingdom is doomed to lose everything. The same applies to you. As long as you believe that laziness is just a bad habit, you remain vulnerable. Because you don't fight against habits, you fight against forces. And if laziness is a force, you need to treat it as such. Study its movements, understand its strategies, identify its weaknesses, and build a plan to overcome it. This is not cheap self-help. This is internal politics. This is Machiavelli applied to everyday life. Pay attention to the little things. Laziness never attacks when you're strong. It attacks when you're alone in your room, when you're emotionally exhausted, when you're worried, when you've already lost some battles during the week. It's in these moments that it appears wearing a mask of comfort. Machiavelli would say that no enemy directly attacks a well-defended castle. He waits for nightfall, waits for distraction, waits for the door to be ajar. Laziness does exactly that. It waits for you to feel vulnerable. And when it senses the opening, it promises peace. It promises rest. It promises that tomorrow will be better. But this promise, like many political promises of the past, only exists to keep you where you are. There's something unsettling and true in the idea that your life could be completely different if you better governed your inner kingdom. It's not about being perfect. It's not about becoming a disciplined robot. It's about taking the throne that should be yours. It's about realizing that every small daily decision has profound implications for the future you say you want to achieve. It's about understanding that ambition without strategy is just a fantasy. Machiavelli didn't believe in dreams. He believed in action. He believed in structure. He believed that power is built, not imagined. And perhaps the most important question that arises at the beginning is, who is in charge now? You or laziness? Who really makes the decisions when no one is watching? Who sets the pace of your life? Who controls the territory of your time? Because in the end, every day you hand over the throne to someone. And the truth that no one likes to admit is that most people hand over that throne to comfort. They hand it over to tiredness. They hand it over to fear. They hand it over to habit. They hand it over to laziness, disguised as an ally, when in reality it is the greatest enemy of your ambition. This is the part no one told you. This is the part Machiavelli would make you see without mercy. The conflict within you is not moral. It's political. And as long as you don't accept this reality, you will continue to be governed by a force you pretend not to see. But this is only the beginning. And if you continue from here, you will realize that there is a strategic way to turn this game around. You've probably already noticed that laziness doesn't act as an outright enemy, but as a force that hides in the details of your routine, in the small moments when you believe you're in control. But in reality, you're already being manipulated. And it's precisely in these seemingly insignificant moments that your inner principality begins to crumble. Machiavelli would say that a ruler who doesn't see the signs of his own weakening is always the last to realize he's lost his power. This happens to you when you wake up in the morning and feel that subtle weight on your body, not real tiredness, but a manufactured discouragement, almost as if someone had tampered with the structure of your thoughts during the night. You open your eyes and immediately start negotiating with your own mind. 5 more minutes, 1 more rest, 1 more moment that won't make a difference. The thing is, it always does make a difference. Perhaps you can relate to this common scene. The alarm clock rings, you know you have something important to do, but a part of you says it doesn't need to be now. You roll over, swap the commitment for a few more minutes on your phone, and without realizing it, you've already surrendered the first decision of the day to what Machiavelli would call a rival internal force. This simple, almost innocent act carries enormous weight because it's not just a delay, it's a surrender. It's the silent confirmation that you're not in control. And the worst part is that while you believe you're just choosing to rest a little, you're allowing laziness to advance an entire territory within you. This kind of situation happens all the time. You tell yourself you'll work out after work, but when you get home, you feel that wave of emotional exhaustion that, curiously, always appears at crucial moments. You promise you'll start an important project on Saturday morning, but on Saturday something more urgent comes up. You swear you'll study for 2 hours, but first you decide to watch a short video, and then another and another, and before you know it, the afternoon is gone. The outside world remains the same, but inside you a silent coup d'etat has taken place. Meanwhile, ambition watches from afar, frustrated, like a legitimate king who was deposed without even having a chance to fight. The cruelest detail of this dynamic is how laziness creates convincing justifications. Machiavelli said that people are easily led by narratives that offer them psychological comfort, and this is even more true within yourself. Laziness creates stories that seem reasonable. You're overwhelmed. You're not inspired today. You need to be in the right mood to produce. It's better to start when you have more energy. These stories function like political speeches designed to keep the population calm and passive. The population in this case is yourself, and the most dangerous part is that you believe them because they sound kind, they sound caring. But Machiavelli would remind us, not all kindness is sincere. Some are just strategies to maintain power. At various points in your life, you've probably felt that uneasy sensation of realizing you let something slip by, an opportunity that required only minimal action, but you put it off, an idea that could have become something bigger, but you delayed it so much that you missed the timing, a conversation that could have opened doors, but you avoided it out of emotional laziness. These are small defeats that, when accumulated, create the impression that your life is always stuck in the same place. And that's exactly how laziness maintains its hold. Not with big blows, but with an endless sequence of concessions. Each concession eliminates a piece of the future you say you want to have. But not everything is so predictable. There are rare moments when something unexpected happens within you. Sometimes it's a phrase you overhear, a story that crosses your mind, or even the sight of someone who is where you'd like to be. In those moments, a small flame begins to stir, a kind of reminder that you should be living differently. This is the moment when ambition awakens, not like a scream, but like a deep unease. It's when you think, I could be so much more than this. Machiavelli would say that this is the natural return of the legitimate prince to the center of power. He never disappears completely. He is only weakened. But awakened ambition doesn't guarantee victory. On the contrary, its emergence usually provokes an immediate counter-offensive from laziness. It tries to convince you more forcefully, offering comfort, justifications, distractions. It's almost as if it senses its reign is threatened. And this creates an intense internal conflict, a feeling of invisible war that you must have already experienced. It's that moment when you're sitting on the couch, knowing exactly what you should do, feeling the urge to get up, but completely paralyzed. Something in you wants to go, something in you wants to stay, and the two forces begin to clash. It's at this point that you realize laziness isn't simply a lack of energy. It has strategic intelligence. It knows exactly when to attack. It knows your weaknesses. It understands your emotional fragility. It acts like a treacherous advisor in the palace, always on the lookout for an opportunity to sabotage you. And if you look more closely, you'll realize that ambition, however grand, cannot fight alone. It needs structure. It needs strategies. It needs the kind of rational organization that Machiavelli recommended to leaders who wished to maintain power. The problem is that, up until now, you've been fighting the wrong way. You try to motivate yourself. You try to cheer yourself up. You try to feel the will. But Machiavelli would make you see an uncomfortable truth. The greatest powers don't depend on motivation. They depend on mastery, on control, on structure, on decisions made before the critical moment. When a prince wants to keep the throne, he doesn't wait to feel courageous enough to act. He creates mechanisms that make courage irrelevant. That's exactly what you need to start understanding. It's not about overcoming laziness with emotional strength. It's about preventing it from making decisions for you. And if there's an unexpected twist here, it's this. Laziness doesn't need to be eliminated. It needs to be subordinated. You don't need to erase this part of yourself, just put it in its proper place in the internal hierarchy. Laziness exists to conserve energy, to avoid excesses, to prevent unnecessary wear and tear. It has a legitimate function. The problem is that it has assumed a power it shouldn't have. Now it's up to your ambition to reclaim that throne. And from this point, you will begin to understand exactly how this can be done. But for that, you need to recognize something essential. You haven't yet seen the true extent of this internal struggle. By now, you realize there's a silent war raging inside you. But what almost no one tells you is that no internal war is sustained solely by the strength of your adversaries. Every psychological battle is fueled by something invisible, the alliances you form with parts of yourself without realizing it. Just like in an unstable principality, there are small factions within your mind that, even disorganized, exert influence on your daily behavior. Machiavelli knew that a prince doesn't fall simply because his enemy is strong. He falls because he allowed weak allies to occupy strategic positions in the palace. You do the same thing when you let the habit of procrastination, the fear of failure, or the pursuit of comfort take a permanent seat at the decision-making table. Laziness in itself wouldn't be so powerful if it didn't have internal accomplices. One of them is the fear of starting small. Have you ever noticed how your ambition always imagines grandiose scenarios, but your actions always stumble on minute details? It's as if your mind refuses to accept that the path to the extraordinary begins with almost ridiculous steps. Machiavelli would warn that great kingdoms arose from fragile territories that were managed with consistency, not from explosive conquests. But when you look at your own goals, you are ashamed of the simplicity of the first step. And this silent shame is a dangerous ally of laziness. And here arises the first question that needs to be faced with brutal honesty. Why do you demand so much of yourself before you even begin? What insane logic makes you believe that it's only worth acting if the action is born perfect? This demand for immediate greatness is an internal strategy of sabotage. It's as if laziness has found a sophisticated way to disguise itself as ambition, creating such high expectations that any real movement becomes almost impossible. There's another faction within you that Machiavelli would clearly identify: the illusion that the future will be more favorable than the present. You've probably noticed how your mind creates a comfortable fantasy that next week everything will flow better. It's a belief that seems optimistic, but in reality, it's pure politics. It's the populist promise that the ruler makes to the people to postpone conflicts, and you believe it because it frees you from immediate responsibility. But when the ideal tomorrow arrives, you realize that nothing has changed. And why would it? External conditions don't improve when you don't improve internally. This naive belief leads to the second inevitable question. How many perfect futures have you envisioned while your real life remained exactly the same? There is nothing more dangerous than passively waiting for the environment to become favorable in order to override a decision that should be yours. Machiavelli would say that a ruler who depends on luck lives on the brink of collapse. And when you depend on favorable emotional states to act, you are placing your own life in the hands of chance. But there's something even deeper, a point that's almost never mentioned and that completely changes how you see your laziness. Laziness isn't just resistance to effort. It's resistance to transformation. It doesn't fear work. It fears what work will inevitably bring, a change in identity. Because every time you act in a disciplined way, you kill an old version of yourself. And internally, that's terrifying. Laziness acts like a conservative faction within your psychological principality, fighting to keep everything exactly as it is, even if as it is harms you. And from this understanding arises the third question, perhaps the most profound of all. What part of you is so used to your life that you prefer to keep it mediocre rather than face the discomfort of change? This part, which always operates in the shadows, is the true power center of laziness. It's not that you can't act. It's that you fear becoming someone you don't yet know. Machiavelli argued that the greatest resistance a prince faced in reforming his kingdom came precisely from those who benefited from chaos. And within you, there are parts that benefit from disorder. It protects you from criticism, failure, and risk. But at the same time, it binds you to a life that suffocates you. Here enters an unexpected element. Ambition, when isolated, is almost useless. It is inspiring, but disorganized. It wants everything at once. It imagines the pinnacle, but ignores the foundation. It wants power, but doesn't understand politics. And that is why, despite being grandiose, ambition loses so many internal battles. It acts like a young and impulsive prince who has not yet learned to deal with the reality of opposing forces. Without strategy, without structure, without knowledge of its own weaknesses, it governs nothing. And this is where the revelation emerges that you may never have noticed. Laziness wins not because it's stronger, but because you act as if your ambition is invisible. You talk about it, you dream about it, but you don't incorporate it into the structure of your day. Machiavelli said that the most powerful princes are those who transform intention into system. You haven't done that yet, and that's why your ambition remains just a beautiful inspiration, while laziness continues to be the real power. This observation inevitably leads to another uncomfortable reflection. How do you expect to overcome an organized internal force with fragmented and sporadic impulses? This is not how you conquer a kingdom. This is not how you govern yourself. This is not how you build power. And while all of this unfolds silently within you, one last question arises, marking the end of this section. If Machiavelli were by your side, observing how you conduct your own life, he would say that you are governing or merely being governed. From this point in the journey, the narrative needs to delve a little deeper into the invisible layer where the decisions we swear we freely chose are formed. There are moments in life when we believe we see the whole picture, but when we look closely, we realize that half the stage was in the shadows. It is there, in that neglected space between desire and action, that the forces that shape ambition and, at the same time, sabotage its realization usually hide. Many of history's most disciplined thinkers have recognized this nebulous territory as the true battlefield of the individual. Others, more daring, have asserted that it is the only place where freedom truly exists. And it is precisely here that an uncomfortable revelation emerges. Almost everything we believe to be a solid choice may have been merely an instinctive reaction masked as a rational decision. How can we be sure that we are steering our destiny and not just following impulses that pretend to be reasoning? This question is not new, but it gains strength when we analyze improbable episodes that, at first glance, seem like living contradictions. A little remembered example is that of the French mathematician Évariste Galois, who developed revolutionary theories while living under constant political and emotional persecution. He wrote concepts that would change modern mathematics the night before the duel that would take his life, as if the imminent threat had unlocked a clarity impossible on ordinary days. Some interpret this as despair, but there is another possible view. Perhaps the mind awakens a kind of radical focus when it understands that it can no longer waste time on distractions. Ambition, repelled by routine, comfort, and doubt, sometimes needs to be pushed to the limit to reveal itself. And perhaps you have already felt this in moments when urgency, even if artificial, unlocked an energy you didn't know you possessed. What would happen if this energy could be summoned without real risk, without imminent collapse? Following another equally surprising story, Japanese scholars reported the case of an artisan who, over decades, produced only a single piece per year. He worked slowly, almost in a trance, ignoring any conventional productivity. And yet his creations became objects of global desire. sold for prices he never imagined receiving. The curious thing is that the artisan never sought recognition. In fact, he completely rejected the idea of quick success. His only goal was to capture, in each work, the exact feeling of harmony he believed existed between time, touch, and patience. He said his work only took shape when the world around him seemed to slow down. There is something profoundly disturbing about this stance. While the rest of society rushes to produce more, he moved in the opposite direction and still achieved an extraordinary result. This forces us to ask whether the speed we idolize is not precisely destroying the quality we seek. Is haste really synonymous with efficiency, or just a way to anesthetize our lack of depth? These stories open up space for a less obvious reflection. Ambition doesn't develop at the pace of society, but at the internal pace of each individual. And this pace is almost always irregular, fluctuating, and unsettling. There are days when motivation flows easily, and others when it seems to evaporate. The common mistake is trying to standardize this fluctuation, forcing it to appear constant. When this doesn't happen, guilt, frustration, and self-criticism arise perfect shadows for ambition to hide in. But there is a rare and little practiced alternative, observing these fluctuations as if they were part of the process itself. Ancient cultures called this the breath of the spirit, a metaphor for the natural movement that precedes any significant creation. What would change if you treated your highs and lows not as failures but as indications of the right time to act? Another unexpected revelation comes from experiments conducted at behavioral research centers in Germany. In these experiments, volunteers placed in extremely quiet environments showed a considerable increase in their ability to solve complex problems, while participants exposed to mild but constant stimuli notifications, distant conversation, small noise, experienced a drastic drop in performance. Curiously, when asked, most claimed not to perceive that the noises were disruptive. The brain, accustomed to the excess, simply ignored the interference. But the results showed the opposite. Even when ignored, the noise still drained cognitive energy. This is a disturbing finding because it reveals that much of our difficulty in progressing is not due to a lack of willpower, but to the invisibly hostile environment that surrounds us. And here another inevitable question arises. How many of your failures were truly your own, and how many were merely symptoms of the chaos around you? If we connect all these narratives, we perceive a common point that is rarely discussed. Great transformations are not born from brute force, nor from haste, nor from blind discipline. They emerge from gaps, improbable moments, accidental combinations of focus, silence, and emotional urgency. It's as if ambition has a life of its own, waiting for the exact moment when the mind stops fighting against itself. The real irony is that we try to control everything, when in fact what we need most is to learn to perceive when the right path reveals itself spontaneously. Have you ever felt that strange sensation that something important was about to happen, even without apparent reason? What if that intuition is more reliable than you imagine? As we move on to the next part, it's impossible to ignore the silent conclusion that is formed. Perhaps the greatest enemy of ambition is not laziness, nor lack of talent, but the inability to recognize the exact moment when we should act. We fail not because of insufficiency, but because of misalignment. We act too early, too late, too fast, or too slow. The secret may lie in adjusting that internal compass, that music. Only you can hear until it coincides with the invisible opportunity that has always been in front of you. And when that alignment finally happens, everything changes with such naturalness that it seems supernatural. At this point in the journey, the narrative begins to take on a different weight, as if something is about to break through an invisible surface. There are moments in life when everything seems stable, predictable, almost too comfortable. But it is precisely in these moments that small cracks appear, discreet signs that the calm was never more than an interval between two storms. It is on this fragile ground that ambition and laziness wage their most silent battle. And, surprisingly, this battle doesn't resemble a traditional one. It's more like a game of shadows, where each movement hides an unexpected consequence. What happens when, without realizing it, you make a decision that completely changes the direction of your life? In many cases, this kind of turning point arises from something minimal, almost insignificant. A casual comment, an uncomfortable situation, a mistake that seemed irrelevant. Reports from researchers studying behavioral patterns show that major transformations often stem from seemingly fragile triggers. There are curious records of individuals who changed careers after a single frustrating day, as if the sum of hundreds of accumulated annoyances finally found a breaking point. The most intriguing thing is that these turning points are not usually planned. They simply appear and take shape. There is a secret logic behind it, a kind of emotional algorithm that no one teaches, but that everyone executes. And this is where the story narrows. Would you recognize this breaking point if it happened now? This type of question gains even more weight when we observe accounts from people who have gone through extreme moments before finding absolute clarity. One case cited in psychological studies is that of a mountaineer who, trapped in a storm, realized that his panic began to disappear precisely when the situation became most critical. He described the sensation as an absolute silence within the mind, a kind of unexpected order that emerged from total chaos. It was in this state that he made quick, cold decisions that saved his life. Curiously, upon returning to normality, he confessed to never having experienced such deep focus. Why does the mind, instead of collapsing, sometimes act perfectly under extreme pressure? From this point on, the narrative needs to accelerate, not because time is running out, but because that's the nature of decisive moments. They arrive without warning, demand immediate choices, and leave consequences that no one can foresee. Imagine, for example, someone who has always lived cautiously, following every rule, every plan, every external expectation. Now imagine that for a single instant, this person clearly sees the distance between what they live and what they desire. The shock is devastating. Some people recoil and pretend not to have seen anything. Others, however, take a step towards the unknown. Sometimes a hesitant step, sometimes a leap that seems suicidal. But this leap, when it happens, can transform an entire life. And here arises the question that begins to tighten the stomach. Which of these people have you been until now? There is also the unexpected element, the one that completely transforms the understanding we believed we had of ourselves. Recent research has shown that the human brain does not distinguish, in emotional terms, between fear and deep expectation. Both provoke almost identical responses. This means that often what we interpret as anxiety may simply be pent-up energy, ready to be channeled. What seems like a blockage may actually be the necessary impulse for the next move. This revelation acts like a key that silently turns in the mind. What if you weren't stuck, but just waiting for the right time? This point connects to another intriguing phenomenon observed in high-performance athletes. Many report that shortly before a perfect execution, they experience a paradoxical sensation. The body feels light, but the mind becomes heavy and precise, as if calculating something invisible. It's a state that lasts seconds, but it decides everything. In that short interval, the person knows that there are only two possibilities: to fail or to surpass themselves. And, strangely, this awareness doesn't paralyze. It awakens. There's a force that arises precisely from the perception of risk, a kind of internal alert that only appears when the moment demands everything. Have you ever experienced that second before the jump, even without realizing it? As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that there is no longer room for neutrality. Every real or metaphorical character who has journeyed through this experience has had to face a specific moment when the cost of remaining still became greater than the fear of moving. It is in this kind of moment that the external story meets the internal story. And when that happens, something inevitable breaks. Sometimes it's an old belief, sometimes a comfortable habit, sometimes an entire identity built over years. The rupture hurts, but it opens a crack through which a light that has always been blocked enters. The question that remains is straightforward. If that crack appeared today, would you have the courage to cross it? In the final minutes of this part, the tension builds not from dramatic events, but from the approach of a simple truth that cannot be ignored. Life doesn't wait, and neither does ambition. Everything you've avoided, everything you've postponed, everything you've pretended not to see is beginning to converge. There's an almost electric feeling in the air, as if something, a decision, a discovery, a change is about to happen. And the most striking thing is that this change doesn't depend on a special talent, nor on a perfect plan, but on an almost imperceptible inner gesture, the willingness to drop the last excuse. When this gesture finally happens, the narrative doesn't close, doesn't conclude, doesn't rest. It leans towards the next stage, as if pulling the reader by the hand. The feeling is of being on the verge of something bigger, something that will only be revealed in the final moment. And it is precisely there, in this silent suspense, that the story prepares the ground for the conclusion, the moment when everything that has been said, felt, and postponed must finally take shape. We've reached the point where the journey ceases to be merely a reflection and transforms into a mirror. Everything that came before, the internal conflicts, the invisible disputes, the fears hidden behind ambition, now converges at a decisive moment. It is here that each person who has heard this narrative must make a simple yet profound choice to continue living according to the impulse of laziness, or to take control of their own story, as Machiavelli would advise any prince who wished to maintain power. This is the instant where theory meets practice, and where ideas take shape in real life. From here on, what you decide to do determines who you will become in the years to come. In many situations, people believe that grand changes depend on extraordinary energy, almost military discipline, or perfect mental clarity. But this has never been true. Real transformation is born from micro-actions, almost discrete, that are repeated until they form an unshakable structure. This is the Machiavellian principle that few realize, not conquering by force, but by constancy. If you take a tiny step every day, even in a state of tiredness or doubt, you will be producing an advantage that accumulates. Laziness is powerful only while you remain still. When you move, even slightly, it loses its hold. It is in this minimal movement that power is reborn. There may be resistance. In fact, it's inevitable. The mind creates perfect justifications to keep you stuck exactly where you are, because it preserves a false sense of security. But Machiavelli always repeated that too much security is just another form of vulnerability. Life demands cunning. It demands courage at the right moment. It demands small strategies that break the cycle of stagnation. A simple agenda, one task a day, a small victory that breaks the logic of procrastination. These gestures seem almost irrelevant, but they form walls when repeated intentionally. And in the end, what seemed impossible becomes just a sum of small, well-executed acts. It's important to recognize that this change doesn't stem from a grand internal explosion, but from something quieter and more powerful, the decision not to wait to feel the urge to act. Willpower is volatile, almost always absent in the most important moments. Strategy is solid, reliable, and predictable. The difference between those who achieve and those who stagnate lies in how each person positions themselves in relation to their own impulses. You don't need to be fearless, disciplined, or enlightened. You just need to be someone who acts before feeling. This is the uncomfortable truth that Machiavelli would use without hesitation. The prince who waits for motivation to arrive loses his throne. The prince who acts builds his own kingdom. When you start applying this principle to your daily life, you'll realize something that escapes most people. Laziness doesn't disappear. It's still there, observing, waiting for an opening to regain control. But once you understand its nature, it loses its power. It's no longer a monster, but a useful adversary, a kind of internal enemy that serves to remind you who you don't want to be. Machiavelli would say that even enemies have their strategic role, and perhaps laziness is precisely that. A constant reminder that there's a version of yourself that needs to be overcome daily. A version that tries to protect you from effort, but that without realizing it, also protects your mediocrity. Looking at yourself through this new lens, everything takes on a different perspective. Ambition ceases to be a distant dream and becomes a possible path. Goals that seemed unattainable become mere stepping stones. Difficulties cease to be a sign of inability and become a sign of progress. There is a specific moment when you realize that life doesn't change when something external happens. It changes when you choose to act differently. It's a silent but definitive change, like a key turning in an old lock. And when that key turns, nothing is ever the same again. Perhaps you still have doubts. Perhaps you think you're not ready. That's normal. Almost everyone believes they need to wait for a stronger version of themselves to begin. But that stronger version never appears out of nowhere. It's built through friction, repetition, falling, and getting back up. It's built precisely on the days when you didn't want to do anything and did it anyway. True power is born from resisting one's own destructive impulses. It's the continuous act of governing oneself when it would be easier to give up. That's the power Machiavelli would value above all others. Now, as this narrative comes to an end, the most important question of all arises. What will you do after the video ends? The answer doesn't need to be grand. It can be small, almost invisible to an outsider. But if it's real, it will change everything. Maybe you'll write a list. Maybe you'll complete a task you've been putting off for months. Maybe you'll simply decide that tomorrow you'll begin with a symbolic gesture that marks the end of stagnation. It doesn't matter what form it takes as long as it's the first step towards the inner governance you've always been afraid to assume. The transformation begins right here, at the point where the story meets the decision. And before I finish, I need to ask something simple, but essential for this community to grow and for more people to find this strength within themselves. Like the video, because that helps the content reach those who need it. Comment, even anonymously, just saying that you made it to the end or that you're going to take the first step today. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me. Your presence here isn't just a number. It's part of the movement we're building together. And if you decide to act from this moment on, then the story isn't over. It's just beginning.